Hello YouTube, and Merry Christmas to those of you that are going to watch this video on the day of release. My present for you guys this year is a little bit special. It's not something that can be put under a tree, it's not really a tangible item either. Instead, it's a philosophical concept, and that is the concept of standards. We are going today to discuss the importance of standards and why setting them too low is a recipe for disaster, both because it leads to a weak character, but also because it tends to lead to a mediocre physique. And if you're in this game to build a good body, I'm certain it's not an outcome that you desire. Now, I didn't just wake up and think, oh, I think you guys have low standards, let's boost that. Instead, it's an event that triggered this video because I think it was a few weeks ago, I posted an announcement on the community page about a physique review stream where people can send their pictures and I tell them if they have weak points, what they have to focus on, and how to get a better aesthetic physique in general. And to promote that stream, I used a picture of a French bodybuilder named Herzoviac, who has an amazing natural physique. And next to his physique, I attached a grade, and that grade was a 6. And of course, it got people talking. People were very curious to see and to hear and to understand why such an amazing package got such a low grade. And it triggered a bunch of reactions that I found extremely interesting within my community and the natural community in general, because in essence, a lot of people accused me of having unrealistic standards and of blackpilling people, of pushing standards onto people that would hurt them down the line. And I found that very interesting because to me, the exact opposite is true. And I want to explain to you why. I want to explain to you why having someone that promotes high standards is needed and why you want to become that person in your own life. But before we get into that, I have to give you a bit of a backstory behind the grade, because some of you don't know who Herzoviac is. If you don't, I recommend you go subscribe to his channel. He has an amazing body, but also a lot of knowledge to go with it, which for naturals tend to go hand in hand. And this very same Herzoviac went in France to visit a French bodybuilding expert named Michael Gundil. If you're French, I don't need to present you Gundil. He is very famous, but if you're an American, or even if you are from somewhere else, you most likely don't know the guy. Even though, if you train bodybuilding, a lot of the things that you follow, that your favorite influencers, especially the science-based influencers, feed you, that's stuff that they copied from Gundil, who was already saying that shit in the 90s. So they're not doing anything new. And that very person is a hard ass, and he tends to be pretty severe when he grades people because he works with IFBB pros, the top of the sport, who are, yes, on drugs, but who represent the pinnacle of what is possible with your body. These people, when they want advice, they go to Michael Gundil. He coaches them. And so he's very used to seeing these big bodies. So when he saw Herzoviac, a natural lifter, he gave him a shit grade and he told him that he had small legs, he lacked abs, he lacked chest, and he had shit calves. This is, of course, not something that you want to hear, especially when you know yourself that your level is super, super high. But if you look at the video, and I'm going to put images so that you can actually see the reaction because it's so interesting, you notice that at first, Herzoviac looks hurt and he looks angry. You can see it on his face that his ego is struck and he wants to react emotionally. But very quickly, he manages to, in a sense, push these emotions down and think logically about what just happened. And instead of using that as an opportunity to get mad at someone who is giving him advice, he uses that as something to fuel his motivation. And this is a lesson in standards. When confronted with someone who forcibly pushes you upward, what is your reaction? Well, if your reaction is to resist this, then you are practicing a religion of mediocrity. But if you allow it to become an updraft that is going to carry your ambition higher, then you are practicing a religion of excellence. You are an ego. Herzoviac in this video behaved like an ego. And notice how ego and ego sound very similar. That's going to be relevant later on. But this is a character trait that I think is hyper important to develop because your genetic potential is valid for bodybuilding. It's going to make a big difference down the line. But the number one trait that is an acquired trait that you can develop that is even more important is this. It's the ability to respond properly when someone is going to extend criticism to you, which is the ability to have higher standards. And interestingly enough, many people don't get that. And as proven by the community post, many people get mad at that notion. They get mad at the notion that they could improve, that there could be such a thing as them being even better than they are. Why? Because to be able to accept that there is a better version of you around the corner, you must accept that the current version of you is bad or incomplete or not enough. A lot of people whose physiques objectively are not that good cannot do that. So this is why I absolutely wanted to open with an example of a bodybuilder that we all agree is objectively good, that was still able to not be a slave to his ego and move past that. To me, that's the sign of someone who has a strong ego. Because if we look at this, I know that the term ego is thrown around a bunch. We're not going to get into the psychology of this, but in this case, we can say clearly that by definition, an ego only needs protecting if it's weak. So if your ego needs to always be spared criticism or else it shatters, then you have a weak ego. A solid ego, on the other hand, is one that can take blows and still remain intact. And that is the type of ego that everyone wants to develop, but one that is extremely, extremely rare, because there is a paradox to lifting and training in general, and it also applies to everything in life that you try to get better at. The more you train, the better you get and the bigger you become. And with this, the bigger your ego also becomes, because now you're starting to see, well, I've accomplished a lot, I have a high level, etc., etc. And that is absolutely unavoidable, and I'm not telling you not to do that. Having a big ego is not a bad thing, unlike what some people would like you to believe. The problem is that the more it inflates, the more fragile it becomes, because the more susceptible to criticism you become, because you think, I have done so much, and people should not get to tell me that I still have much to do. And this is why so many advanced lifters stop progressing. The progression curve does this, and then it stalls, and they just stagnate. And I've seen that, especially on YouTube with influencers who have the same body for 5, 6, 7 years. Why? Is it a natural limit? No, it's because of exactly what I just described. They have bought into the idea that they know everything there is to know, so they stop striving, and so they stop growing. Because if you perceive any criticism against your physique or what you've built as, in a sense, an attempt to destroy it, instead of an attempt to build it up even further, then it's your mindset that's the problem. And it shows that it's your ego that's talking. Because if you viewed your body as a vessel for the self, not for the ego, you would accept the idea that it's a project that should go on forever. So it should constantly be under construction and it can constantly improve. And as such, things like saying, I am done, I have nothing else to learn, or I am perfect, which is what you do in essence when you push back against someone who tells you, hey, you still have things to improve on, is the proof that you are not making statements from the self, you're making statements from the ego. And as we know and established, the ego is subjective and oftentimes a liar. Because your ego wants to spare itself the embarrassment of having to be vulnerable or having to recognize weaknesses. It's a purely emotion-driven core that we all have and that is required to progress in any endeavor. This video is not here to sell you the notion of an ego death, because in bodybuilding, ego death is also the death of progression. But always keep in mind that eventually that big inflated ego that has gotten bigger than your biceps and your head becomes your greatest limitation. And so the real issue with the majority of people isn't that they have too big of an ego, because there's no such thing. Rather, it's that this big ego is also, coincidentally, weak. And my point is that the fact that these people also happen to have low standards is not a coincidence. It's both a consequence and the cause of their weak ego. And this is why promoting high standards is so healthy. It promotes the expansion of the self, but also the, in a sense, bulletproofing of the ego, which also connects to further expansion of the self. It's a virtuous circle as opposed to a vicious circle. And I have a few examples of you to really, in a sense, set in stone the importance of standards. So the first thing is the cultural factor. I've always said it, the natural limit is a cultural limit. It's not biological. And what I mean by this is something that anyone who has been through multiple countries can attest to. So for example, if you go to a gym in France, I've spent many years training there, you'll notice that the average lifter is around 170 pounds. The average physique is in these waters, and it's fairly mediocre. Most people are very, very small. Now, if you go to a different country, like the USA, you'll see that the average is higher. The average lifter in the USA might be 180 pounds, so they are slightly bigger. That's not a massive difference, but it's still a difference. Can we explain that difference via biological factors? Not really, because the people of the USA were the people of Europe 400 years ago. So they didn't really have time to create a biological environment where muscle growth would become something that is promoted and therefore facilitated. So instead we have to look at the culture. How do these people interact with fitness and what is their standards? In France, we have no fitness culture. If anything, we have the opposite of a fitness culture. We have an anti-muscle and anti-bodybuilding culture. People make fun of bodybuilding. It's still seen as something ridiculous. As a result, people's standards are extremely, extremely low because they don't strive. There is nothing for them to strive for. There is no example. We don't have Arnolds. We don't have Stallones. We don't have these icons of muscularity, enhanced or not. And so, because of that, you would be surprised to see how low the bar really is in France. Someone like Herzoviak is on drugs in France. Like, if he blew up on the French YouTube, he would get accused like this. I would also get accused. Like, even though in the USA, I don't get much accusations of PEDs. Someone like GVS would get accused. The majority of advanced American natural bodybuilders would get accused automatically. Why? Because they're too big. They don't fit in the standards that are very tiny in France. Now, what about the USA? How do we explain that the USA has these massive standards? Well, for what I just explained, you guys have a fitness culture. You have movies that promote these values. You have gyms everywhere. You have hardcore gyms. You have gold gyms. You have a gym culture. And on top of that, you have the American dream, you have the Protestant work ethic, you have this idea that hard work always pays off. And even though that could be a lie, it still encourages people to work hard and naturally people get results. And so the standards are higher because everyone around you is bigger. That is the Pygmalion Effect. It's a very well-studied psychological effect in which if you tell people they're going to do well, they tend to do better. And if you tell them beforehand they're going to suck, they tend to do worse. And this is the proof that emulation, the emulation of standards in particular, meaning the ability to be surrounded by people who are bigger than you, is a direct condition to you being bigger. And once you realize that, well, one, you'll want to surround yourself with big natural lifters, but also you're going to want to surround your thoughts with thoughts of bigness, if that's even a word, of greatness. And what are these things? Your standards. If you constantly cohabit with high standards, your results are going to be higher. If you cohabit with low standards, they're going to be lower because you're psyching yourself out or into doing the thing. And this is also true in the realm of sports. Look at the amount of times a record was unbreakable and it wouldn't move for 10, 20, sometimes 30 years. And then what happens? One guy breaks it. And once that guy breaks it, now everyone breaks it. What is this? Is this synchronicity? Is this happenstance? I don't think so. I think that what happens is that all of these people were telling themselves, oh, this record is unbreakable, and so they were limiting themselves. And then that one guy that did not think like this because he had high standards breaks it, and suddenly people think, oh, it is breakable, I can do it, and they do it. So by seeing someone achieving something that you thought was impossible, your ego accepts the idea that attempting to reach that goal might not result in failure. And since the ego hates failure more than anything else, previously it was preventing you from making that attempt, even though you could have succeeded. The reason why you did not succeed is because you did not attempt. But because you are no longer afraid of this emotional blowback, now you attempt and now you succeed. And this proves that for many people, the reason why they cannot reach what they want in life, a good physique, a good character, or anything in reality, isn't because they believe it is impossible. That's just one part of it. The second part is because they're afraid of how they would feel if they failed. And this is what it means when someone says, it's impossible. It's impossible means I can't do it. And I can't do it means I'm not enough. Me as an essence is not enough to do it. Once you start viewing it as in this fashion, you realize that this is actually quite severe. This is not something that you ever want to tell yourself. But, and this is a big but, because I know it's a rebuttal that I get a lot when I preach high standards, don't confuse having high standards with being entitled to these standards. If someone else has a better physique than you, it should not be taken as the sign that you will also get that physique. This is not what I'm arguing here. What I'm saying is that it should be understood as a potential that the ceiling is much higher than you once thought, and that should motivate you to keep striving, because if that guy did it, why not me? And if your answer is, but genetics, you have a problem. This is the mindset I'm trying to deconstruct, but genetics. If you think like this, you also most likely have an entitled and spoiled view of what success and improvement even is. Because this is a complaint that is often produced by low standard people. They will say that being exposed to bigger and better physiques is bad for their mental health, that it makes them feel worse about themselves. It's what happened on my post. Erzoviak, with an amazing physique, got a 6. A lot of people saw that and thought, well, if that guy gets a 6, what do I get? Shit, you get a 2. I don't fucking know. You get a 1. Why is that a problem? Realistically, if you have such a low grade, that should just encourage you to get a higher grade. But if your reaction is trying to blame the person who promoted that standard by saying, well, now I feel bad, I'm not responsible for that. If I squeeze an apple, what comes out? Apple juice. If I squeeze you and what comes out is resentment and hatred towards your own body because of your lack of results, I didn't create that. You reacted to me trying to make you see that problem in a negative way. That should be a lesson to you. That should make you realize that there is an issue with the way you're perceiving these things. Most likely you are someone who is clinging to an ego that is both small and weak. And if you could just let go of this, maybe yourself would improve, maybe your physique would improve. But that would take actually being vulnerable and realizing, yeah, the reason why I feel bad when I see other people doing better is because I know that I should be doing better. And I insist on this because if you allow these people to run the show, what they do soon enough is that they lower everyone's standards with them because it makes them feel better. Because the mediocre love nothing more than mediocrity, because if everyone is mediocre, then no one is. Suddenly you're no longer a piece of shit because you live amongst pieces of shit. And this is, by the way, typically the case with people who complain about fake natties. Notice how often they don't point out the fact that fake natties are a problem because they're liars, they're dishonest, and they share garbage information. Times and times again, the reason for their complaint is because fake natties promote unrealistic expectations, aka I look at this guy and it makes me feel worse. Well, in that case, whether or not that guy is on drugs is really irrelevant, because there exist people who look better than you who are not on drugs. Which also leads to the following problem. Who said that expectations needed to be realistic? Who set that idea in the first place? We just saw that high standards, by definition, tend to be unrealistic because they exist in the realm of the what if, of the possibility, of the nothing is certain. If your standards always align with what is certain and what you know you can accomplish, you're going to have low standards. I don't know a single person who, when they got started with fitness, were able to see what they would have become. If you had asked me when I was 110 pounds, hey, do you think one day you'll be 220 with 18 inches arms and 28 inches legs? I would have laughed at you and said, no, look at me now, it's not possible. Thank God I didn't make that mistake back then. Back then, I was just thinking, I will keep training and I'll see where I go. This is the highest potential standard you can set for yourself, because now your standard is no longer a limitation. If your standard limits you, if it's a glass ceiling, why the fuck did you even create it? You created it because it's an act of cowardice. That way you can limit your own potential, and when you end up being mediocre, you can tell yourself that is all I could have achieved. Lies. Does that mean that you have to be delusional? In a sense, yes, because as we just saw, there is literally no upsides to being a realist in the game of lifting. Being delusional means refusing to set your own limits and training expecting to keep growing forever. At the end of the day, nature limitations, they are there. They are in your body, you don't know where they are exactly, but they exist, I don't deny that. The thing is that whether you believe in them or not, they are there. So what is even the point of intellectualizing them? Because 99% of the time, as we saw, you're not going to be accurate in your assessments of your own potential, and so you're going to lower it, which in turn will eventually serve to you also as a cope, because when your results as a direct consequence of these low standards end up being also low, you're going to be able to turn around and say, well, it's because I always had low potential. You see how vicious this is? It's the excuse that creates the outcome that becomes the explanation for the next excuse. The worst part about that being that oftentimes you're going to tell yourself that you are enlightened because of that. You're going to call yourself a realist. But we both know that it's not true. The man who says, I'm okay with my low results because I have low potential, is not at peace with it. If he was at peace with it, he would not feel the need to even convey that information. And we see that particularly well with people who complain about genetics. This is a subtract of natural lifters that I personally find very pathetic and also despise. It's okay to use genetics as a way to sort of assess where you stand. Sort of like a curiosity thing. Like for me, for example, I keep telling people I think I'm a 5. What it means is that I think I'm fairly average for bodybuilding. Am I going to use that as an excuse to not train hard? No, it's the exact opposite. I'm a fucking 5. I don't have time to waste complaining or being whiny. I have to work twice as hard as the next guy because an 8 or a 9 is going to blow me out of the water. So I better get my ass into gear and actually keep fucking moving. But these types, no, that's not what they do. Instead, they use mediocrity as a reason for why they should not train hard. But they do it in a way that takes away their responsibility because they blame genetics. And when you blame genetics, you blame something outside of yourself, something outside of your control. It's my biology. I'm only small because I was given a bad biology. But this is hilarious in retrospect, because when people say this, I don't think they realize what they're really saying. You're essentially admitting that your essence as a man is bitch-made, that as a physical specimen you are such a failure that even with all of the hard work in the world, you could never get something great. But you're okay with that because your brain accepted it, which means that you are at peace, you are enlightened, you are a realist? No, you are a coward. And a coward would ask a question such as, what happens if my standards are too high and I don't reach my goal and I'm disappointed? And my answer to that is, nothing happens. You get to be disappointed. If you're never disappointed in your journey of self-improvement, you're not shooting high enough. If you are always successful, it's not that you're perfect, it's that you don't take enough risks. You know, it's sort of Pascal's gamble, le pari de Pascal, which dictates that between believing in God or not believing in God, apparently, according to this theology and philosophy, it's always better to believe in God. We're not going to talk about that today, but instead I want to reappropriate this and talk about potential and standards. What if you decide to live your life having super high standards and thinking your potential is super high? Well, you're going to trick yourself into training harder because you'll think you can accomplish so much. Okay. Next condition and next set of experiment. What if you do the opposite and you spend your entire life thinking you have low potential and having low standards, and so you do a minimal amount of work and you end up with minimal results? Which one was better? In the first scenario, even if you end up not accomplishing all that you wanted, you'll still have something pretty great. So, in the two scenarios of failure or success, you're still much better off than in the second scenario where even if you succeed, you didn't really achieve much, and if you fail, that's even fucking worse. But is it even possible to fail when your standards are low? No, that's the entire point of low standards. So we see that logically, mathematically, having high standards is always better. And if your counter-argument is, but disappointment, you're a baby. Who cares if you're disappointed? No one has ever claimed that getting a good physique is easy. Because why would it need to be easy in the first place? If it was easy, it would have no value. The point is that it's possible. You know it's possible, I know it's possible because we see examples of it. As a man, if you see others do it, you should think, I should be able to do it too. Are you delusional? Do they have better genetics than you? Maybe, but who cares? The thought is what matters. The productive, the positive thought that makes you move forward. This is the perspective shift that you need to make happen because it places the responsibility of your success or failures squarely on your lap. And so many people fail to do that. Which is also why black-pilled lifters always make me laugh, because they love to point out people with high standards as toxic because they're not realistic. But they fail to understand that you create your own reality. So as an influencer, I have a choice. Do I promote high standards at the risk of potentially frustrating some of you, Or do I keep you in your comfort zone with very low standards by telling you that, oh yeah, your 14 inches arms are perfectly fine, bro. Your shitty 4-pack is okay, you're aesthetic. Well, to me, that's an easy choice. Of course, I'm going to take the first route, because I know that this is what is going to be the most conducive to you guys getting great results, but also having a positive outlook on natural bodybuilding. And if you get blackpilled and demotivated by being exposed to people who are better, or by being exposed to higher aspirations, higher standards, then you have a loser's mindset, and I'm not really interested in sparing your feelings because that's not doing you a favor. Because if I did this, the only thing I would be sparing is your ego, but I would be actively hurting yourself and your self-improvement, which is the exact opposite of what you need. It always amuses me and amazes me when I see men with this loser mindset seeking out more content that reinforces the loser's mindset, that then turn around and say, oh, I don't understand, I'm miserable. You're actively miserable. You have a practice of misery going because it's your comfort zone. You would rather the comfort of your current misery than the suffering of potential failure, even though it is that failure that would lead you out of that misery. And this is exactly, by the way, what keeps the average male average. He refuses to accept that he is indeed mediocre, which is the first step towards greatness, and he clings to his small and fragile ego. So when people say, he looks good compared to the average person, what they're doing is they're actively lowering everyone's standard to the average. And that is toxic behavior because the average male looks like shit. The average male is weak. The average male cannot do a single pull-up. The average male has small arms. The average male cannot deadlift their fucking body weight. All things that, to me, should be, across the board, possible for everyone. If you're able-bodied, you should be able to do this. But the average male cannot because the average male spends less than 45 minutes a week being physically active. With all that in mind, fuck the average man. The average man cannot be used as something to set a standard. And the goal of fitness was never to create average people in the first place. Fitness exists to breed above average people, to breed a new race of men and women who exceed their limits. What is the fucking point of us all having fitness channels if the only thing we preach is, oh, stay exactly the same? Might as well just delete all of YouTube Fitness. And at the risk of sounding a bit conceited, I do think that we have public utility because if you think about it like this, the more people improve themselves, the more the standards of society are pushed upward. Why do you think they're so low? It's because everyone finds comfort in low standards. In the dad bods, in the sedentarity, everyone is copying everyone else. But if you had enough of a core group of elite people who are able to demonstrate that there is something else out there, some excellence to be achieved, then the standards would be forcibly pushed upwards, and that would benefit society as a whole. You'd see better mental health across the board, of course better physical health, you'd see more attractive people, which I would argue is good, because beauty is good. And this is why I always preach a culture of excellence. Some would call it an aristocracy, and to me that is perfectly valid. It's an aristocracy of the body, an aristocracy of the mind. It's achievable for people who are willing to work for it, so it makes it fair. Now, is it maybe a bit cruel? Yeah, if you're a bitch and you don't want to feel bad or be disappointed, but to me, the people that comfort others into having shit physiques and shit lives by telling them, oh, well, you're average, so it's okay, everyone is like you, these people are the cruel ones. These people are the dangerous ones. They're taking a position that is very easy to hold, that makes them look nice in the eyes of others, but down the line, they create misery in the lives of people. And this is why mediocrity is born. Because it's much easier to preach mediocrity because you get much less pushback. And granted, positive reinforcement has its place. And it's true that training, doing any physical activity, is better than doing nothing. But we have to remember that people are more likely to stick to this fitness thing if they believe they'll be able to accomplish great things. Because that's what happened with me, that's what happened with everyone that I know who has very good physiques and has achieved a lot. They always held onto the belief that they could be more. And my best tool in this endeavor to make sure that you do put in the time and effort is the topic of this video. It's that high standard that I'm promoting. And I hope that I was able to sell you onto that concept now that you're reaching the end of the segment. Going to the description, I've done 3 physics review streams right now. These are actually, one, very educative, because they'll teach you a lot about weak points, strong points, and how to correct them, but also you'll see some amazing physics in there. And that should make you want to reach these heights as well. And if you want an outside perspective of what your potential is and what you can do to keep improving going forward, you can always request a written review on the Ko-fi page. That is also in the description first link. That also goes if you just want to support the channel because you like the videos, you can pledge $3 a month, and that is really appreciated. I would also recommend that you guys follow the Ko-fi page and keep an eye on it, because I'm working and I've been working on a secret project that should allow me to connect with the natural community even more and help even more people. But that is going to come out in 2025, so you have to be a tiny bit more patient. For now, I'm going to wish you a very good rest of your day. As always, thank you for watching, a very Merry Christmas, and I will see you very soon.